Let's begin by recognizing something fundamental about the nature of the human body. It is not merely a mechanical instrument of flesh and bone. It is, in a profound sense, a vessel, a living structure designed to interact with frequencies and patterns of reality that far exceed our ordinary perceptions. When I speak of your body entering what might be called the fifth dimension, I am pointing toward an expansion of its capacity to resonate with higher order patterns of existence. Now, this is not mystical nonsense. It is, in fact, a profound statement about the relationship between matter and consciousness, between physiology and the transcendent. One of the first things you will notice as this shift begins is a transformation in your physical rhythms. Many of you will experience unpredictable sleep patterns, waking at odd hours, perhaps 2 or 3 in the morning, with a mind charged by what seems to be an unseen current. It may feel disorienting, but do not rush to pathologize this. The body is being recalibrated to process more subtle signals, to tune itself to a broader field of information. Where once you needed long, dreamless sleep to recover, you may now find short but intensely vivid rest periods, often interspersed with deep meditative states, to be enough. This is your body learning to function under a new set of energetic rules. You may also encounter waves of inexplicable energy, bursts of vitality that appear out of nowhere, or even, paradoxically, periods of extreme fatigue. These are not signs of illness in the traditional sense, but rather an adjustment. Imagine a radio being retuned to a new frequency. There is static fluctuation, even discomfort until a clear signal emerges. In the same way, your neurology, your endocrine system, your very cellular structure are undergoing an upgrade, striving to support a higher form of awareness. There will be temporary aches, pressure in the skull, odd sensations in the spine, or tingling in the limbs. The language of the body is trying to catch up with the language of the spirit. Now, this is not to say you should ignore true medical conditions. One must always act responsibly, but many of these so-called symptoms are not problems to be fixed. They are indications that your embodied system is adapting to a fundamentally richer, more complex pattern of reality. As higher dimensional energies move through you, they stimulate dormant structures within the body, awakening potentials that have been slumbering. Ancient traditions spoke of these as energy centers, meridians, or nadis. Modern science may eventually come to understand them in terms of subtle biofields or quantum coherence. Regardless of the terminology, the principle is the same. You are evolving, and evolution is rarely gentle. What is fascinating, and perhaps even a little frightening, is how personal identity begins to loosen its grip when these changes occur. Because your body is the anchor of your self-concept, any shift in its functioning will naturally challenge who you believe yourself to be. This is an invitation, not a threat. It is an invitation to update our identity along with your biology, to see yourself as something greater than a conditioned machine reacting blindly to the environment. You are, rather, a conscious participant in a multidimensional order, and your body is learning to handle the bandwidth of that new participation. So do not be afraid if your appetite changes, or if certain foods you once loved become intolerable. Do not panic if you feel an unfamiliar sense of lightness in your bones or a sudden loss of interest in activities that once seemed essential. The body is becoming more efficient, more attuned, and more capable of expressing the greater intelligence that is trying to move through you. In fact, the best thing you can do is to cooperate with this process, to treat your own vessel with respect, to listen carefully to its signals, and to allow it the space to transform without the interference of panic or old habits. This is the beginning of a new integration, a new contract between matter and spirit. Your body is not betraying you. It is liberating you. So I challenge you, here and now, to meet that liberation with the courage it deserves. Let the body show you what it is capable of when it is no longer shackled to a lower dimension. Let it become the living testament to a higher order of being. Let us now examine something that is, in my view, even more unsettling, and yet more promising, than the transformation of your physical rhythms, the sudden heightening of your sensory and intuitive capacities. As the body adapts to higher dimensional frequencies, so too does the psyche. You may notice, often quite unexpectedly, a sense of expanded perception, as if your attention is no longer confined to the narrow tunnel that culture, habit, and survival have trained it to maintain. For example, you may begin to pick up subtle cues from the people around you with almost shocking accuracy. It can feel like reading the emotional climate of a room without words, sensing the subtext beneath someone's polite conversation, or anticipating their needs before they voice them. This is not magic. It is a natural consequence of tuning your perceptual apparatus to a broader bandwidth. The fifth dimension, if you wish to use that term, is an order of reality where separation is a useful illusion but not an ultimate truth. It is precisely because you are becoming more attuned to that unity that your empathic sensitivity begins to sharpen. But there is more to this than mere empathy. You may discover flashes of insight that seem to break the normal causal chain of reasoning. You might know something before there is any data to confirm it, a kind of direct apprehension that bypasses the rational filters you usually rely on. In traditional terms, this is called intuition. In more modern psychological language, you might call it pattern recognition operating at a hyper-accelerated speed. Whatever the label, the experience is often jarring. We are trained, through decades of education and social conditioning, to worship only what can be measured and categorized. So when your body and mind begin to work in synchrony with higher dimensional flows, your culture-trained sense of skepticism will resist it. And yet, these intuitive glimpses will persist, challenging you to trust a faculty you may have long ignored. Another facet of this sensory expansion is an increasing subtlety of perception. Colors may appear more vivid, sounds more resonant, even ordinary sensory experiences may seem to carry a richness you had previously overlooked. That is not a hallucination, nor is it a sign of delusion. It is the mind's recalibration to an environment that is inherently more interconnected and alive. The fifth dimension is, at least in principle, an order of greater coherence, and coherence reveals itself as beauty, harmony, and depth. When you become capable of registering those qualities directly, your motivation to engage with the world can transform. Yet with this perceptual flowering comes a great responsibility. You find yourself overwhelmed by the flood of impressions, a kind of psychic overstimulation. It is critical to learn to ground yourself, to differentiate between what belongs to you and what belongs to the field around you. You are, after all, still an individual, still tasked with maintaining boundaries, even as you experience a greater oneness. That balance, between being open and being defined, is the hallmark of a mature consciousness. You cannot simply dissolve your individuality into an ocean of empathic impressions without risking chaos. Instead, you must learn to navigate this new perceptual richness with the same disciplined clarity you would apply to any profound tool. If you allow these higher senses to develop without panic, without shame, without the defensive cynicism that our culture so often encourages, you will discover they are not liabilities. They are extraordinary gifts. They allow you to see, truly see, beyond the mask of the world. They let you act with a precision and compassion that conventional reasoning cannot match. They enable you to stand inside your life with the certainty of someone who has felt the hidden patterns at work, rather than merely analyzed them. So let this new awareness serve you. Welcome its arrival. Cultivate it with care. Because if your body is the vessel, then these higher senses are the navigational instruments of that vessel, designed to guide you through the uncharted waters of the fifth dimension. Respect them, refine them, and use them. And remember this, to perceive more is to be called to more. So rise to that calling. It is one thing to speak of heightened perception and bodily attunement, but let us now turn our attention to the domain of emotion. And here I warn you, things can become deeply uncomfortable. Because when the body begins to resonate with higher dimensional frequencies, it does not merely upgrade its sensory channels or its physical patterns. It is also forced to confront everything within you that cannot exist with those frequencies. I mean quite specifically all of the unresolved trauma, the repressed fear, the buried rage, the persistent patterns of shame, guilt, and resentment. The entire subterranean catalogue of pain that most people, quite understandably, do their best to keep hidden. As your system accelerates into this fifth dimensional state, these old psychic burdens will begin to surface. It is as if the seeker recognizes that the load must be lightened before the vehicle can ascend. You may notice sudden memories bubbling up, sometimes from years or even decades ago, often accompanied by a force of emotion that seems disproportionate. This is not a regression. It is not a failure. It is the opposite. It is the psyche's way of excreting what can no longer serve its evolutionary path. Just as the body eliminates toxins when it is healing, the mind will eliminate old, stagnant patterns when it is elevating. Of course, this process is rarely neat or linear. You will likely experience surges of sadness or anger without any apparent cause. You may question your sanity, wondering why these wounds are reappearing just when you thought you had left them behind. That is because you never truly left them behind. You simply built defenses around them, and those defenses cannot hold under the increasing coherence of a higher order. Higher dimensional awareness requires authenticity, and authenticity cannot coexist with unresolved pain. The illusions you erected to protect yourself cannot survive in a state of elevated consciousness. And that is painful, but it is necessary. In a practical sense, this means you must be prepared to engage with your own shadow, to look directly at the parts of yourself you have most feared to acknowledge. If you resist this, if you deny or suppress what is rising, you will only prolong the suffering. The fifth dimension does not permit emotional dishonesty. It is a place of radical transparency. The more courageously you allow these buried feelings to emerge, the faster they can be metabolized. And once they are metabolized, you will discover a kind of freedom you may never have believed possible. There is also a deeply philosophical dimension to this. When you shed these old wounds, you are, in a sense, reconciling with the tragic nature of existence. You are admitting that suffering happened, that you suffered, that you were wounded. But you are also refusing to let that define you any longer. That is a profoundly moral act. It is an act of transformation, one that asserts that your past need not control your future. And in that assertion, there is an opening for an entirely new mode of being to take root. The paradox here is striking. You cannot fully enter a state of higher unity while carrying the poison of resentment and fear. The fifth dimension, you might say, is a state of participation in a greater wholeness. And you cannot participate in wholeness if you are fragmented. So the purging of your emotional history is not a punishment. It is a path to integration. It is a final act of purification that allows your vessel to harmonize with a larger field of intelligence. If you can see this, if you can approach these eruptions of feeling with a measure of respect rather than shame, you will find they lose their power to torment you. Instead, they become teachers. They show you where you have been, and they also show you what you are now ready to release. And what is left after that release is not an empty shell. It is a clearer, stronger, freer self, capable of participating fully in a reality that no longer tolerates fragmentation or denial. So when your pain returns, greet it with the bravery of one who understands its purpose. Do not run. Do not hide. Let it move through you and out of you. Because what emerges on the other side is not simply a healed version of who you were, but the authentic, liberated being you were always meant to become. We come, finally, to what may be the most challenging, and, at the same time, the most inspiring aspect of this transition. If your body is adapting to higher frequencies, if your perception is expanding, if your emotions are being purged and clarified, then there is one inevitable consequence. Your sense of self will begin to shift from the narrow domain of isolated identity to a far grander realization of interconnectedness. You will start to sense, not merely to believe, that you are part of an indivisible fabric of life, that your existence is fundamentally woven together with that of every other living thing. This is not a vague, sentimental notion. It is a rigorous psychological and even philosophical truth. The isolated ego, the small self obsessed with its own survival and its own accumulation of status and resources, is a product of an older, more limited order of consciousness. It was necessary, to be sure, a structure for negotiating a world perceived as hostile and competitive. But as your body and mind elevate to a fifth-dimensional awareness, you will discover that this small self can no longer adequately interpret your experience. There is a call, almost an inner imperative, to adopt a worldview based on unity rather than separation. And that is a far more difficult task than many would assume, because to live from unity means to take radical responsibility. You begin to realize that every word, every action, every thought carries ripples far beyond your immediate perception. You can no longer excuse petty cruelty or justify your resentments, because you see directly that they reverberate through a shared field of consciousness. You see that harming another truly is, in a very real way, harming yourself. This awareness is not some utopian ideal. It is the harsh, demanding truth of a deeper level of participation in existence. You may also feel a growing sense of love, not the soft escapist love of greeting cards, but a powerful, almost overwhelming compassion that challenges you to see even the most difficult people as deserving of dignity. It is as if your perceptual boundaries expand to hold them with your own field of concern. This, too, is part of fifth-dimensional awareness. It can be painful, because it means you cannot so easily demonize or dehumanize others. It breaks down the convenient categories of versus them. And yet that is exactly the point. In a reality where unity is primary, those categories are revealed as illusions. Illusions that kept you small, illusions that perpetuated cycles of suffering. This shift toward oneness also tends to awaken a reverence for nature, for the living systems that sustain you. The forests, the oceans, the skies, even the simplest living creatures. they appear suddenly sacred, worthy of protection and respect. Why? Because your perceptual framework now sees them as extensions of yourself, rather than as resources to be exploited. The fifth dimension, in its most practical sense, demands a moral awakening, a reordering of priorities in which domination is replaced by stewardship. Of course, such a transformation is not easy. We have been conditioned for generations to pursue individual gain and to measure our worth by comparison to others. Shifting into a state of unity, therefore, feels your weapon, feels like a kind of death, the death of the old ego's illusions. But I would argue that this is the death most worth embracing, because what arises in its place is a capacity for participation in something far greater than yourself. It is the realization that your existence is meaningful precisely because it is entangled with everything else, and that meaning cannot be taken from you, because it is rooted in the very fabric of reality. So if you feel this rising sense of interconnection, if you sense a deep empathy where before there was indifference, if you feel drawn to protect life rather than exploit it, if you discover love for others where once there was only rivalry, understand that these are not weaknesses. They are the markers of a consciousness that has finally grown beyond its primitive boundaries. Welcome them, cultivate them, and act on them, because in the end, to recognize that you are one with all things is to accept the greatest responsibility and the greatest liberation a human being can know. It is the burden and the gift of awakening. Carry it with courage and let it transform not just your perspective, but your very way of being in this world.